A question for all you Gen Z and A teenagers out there. Have you ever played an NES, an SNES, or a Sega Genesis? Of course not. But there was once a time where video gaming wasn't just a part of our lives, it was it.
You're not with it. I used to be with it, but then they changed what it was. Now what I'm with isn't it, and what's it seems weird and scary to me. It'll happen to you.
And there was one gaming company that tried to make video games for our grandparents so they wouldn't feel left out at Christmas. I'm talking about GameTek. GameTek was a spin-off group created in 1987 by IGE, who acquired the rights to develop games for the Nintendo Entertainment System based upon two particular shows that you probably heard about sometime: Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. If y'all haven't heard about those shows, I'll just say it right now. Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy are game shows where contestants play games to win prizes and money. These shows have been on TV so long that Adam and Eve were contestants during Couples Week. Well, okay, not that long, but it feels that way. Jeopardy comes second in television airings, but it came first. 1964. Jeopardy is the anti-quiz show, so to speak. Instead of contestants providing the answers, they have to come up with the questions. Yeah, it's like an autistic introvert, much like many of its contestants. The current version of Jeopardy has been on television since 1984 and has had Alex Trebek hosting until his passing in 2020. Since then, it has been hosted by Ken Jennings, the most famous Jeopardy contestant who had a 74-game championship run in 2004. Wheel of Fortune, which debuted in 1973 as a show aimed at women called Shopper's Bazaar, before becoming Wheel of Fortune in 1974, and it has been running continuously since then. The show is based upon the popular children's game Hangman, except it adds a wheel and prizes to be won. It's the dolled-up, extroverted little sister of Jeopardy! The most famous hosts of the show have been Pat Sajak and Vanna White, the former retiring from hosting duties in 2024, while the latter still hosts the show at age 68. So now you know a little about the shows. I want to talk about the video games that were tied into these shows. The first two games that GameTek developed for the NES were simply titled Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy! They simply allowed you to play an NES adaptation of these games. Simple as that. So what's the first thing you notice about these covers? No hosts. Why? Well, GameTek was working with a shoestring budget, and they didn't have the kind of deep pockets they needed to lure Pat Sajak, Vanna White, and Alex Trebek away from their busy schedules. At least not yet, anyways. But who's that turning the letters on Wheel of Fortune? Isn't that Vanna White? Nope. She's the pretty hostess, so that could be anyone. It could be Nina Hartley for all I care. Now, the GameTek Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy games were treated like how the Guitar Hero and Rock Band games were treated in the 2000s. They released 3 different versions of the same game for both games. Wheel of Fortune got Junior Edition and Family Edition, both of which ran on the exact same engines but added new puzzles in case you ran through all the puzzles in the original game's files. Jeopardy also got a Junior Edition, as well as a 25th Anniversary Edition. Now, if I were to claim what the best Jeopardy game ever made was, I'd have to argue that Junior Edition is the one. Because let's face it, you are the hardcore fan. If you actually have a group of friends who want to play Jeopardy with you, they're going to be fed up playing a version of the game aimed at hardcore fans. That's where Junior Edition succeeds. The clues are way, way easier and allow for anyone to be competitive. There's only one flaw: no buzz-in lockout timer. So if one player can read faster than the others, they have an unfair advantage. In 1989, GameTek produced what might be one of the goofiest and Jessica Rabbit cartooniest versions of Wheel of Fortune for the arcade. I mean, just check out the grandma's jiggle physics. And check out the hostess. Once again, not Vanna White, but for the love of Dolly Parton. How else are you going to get boys to come play this game? In 1990, there were 2 more games made for the NES: Wheel of Fortune starring Vanna White and Super Jeopardy! This is where GameTek started using celebrity likeness for Wheel of Fortune, which they kept using for another 6 years until 1997, but we'll get to that later. Anyways, Wheel of Fortune starring Vanna White used a different game engine which felt way clunkier than the developed engine the first 3 games used. But now they had Vanna White as the hostess, and the guys at GameTek maximized the use they could get out of Vanna. They included a poster that came with the game. But honestly, these posters either got tossed in recycling, or maybe some guys cut the poster to make it look like Vanna was naked for gooning material. Hey man, it was the early 90s. Boys had the Sears catalog, Barbie, Betty and Veronica, and National Geographic.
When I hear a twig snap, I think it's my Uncle Ed coming to catch me with my National Geographic. You know, the African pictures?
If you bought Super Jeopardy, you got one hell of a quirky game. What's the first thing you might have seen on the cover?
For 200 points, the answer is...
It's creepy. That talks, that thing.
Yep, it had digitized speech.
Incorrect.
Brutally compressed digitized speech and sound effects. Sometimes you couldn't even comprehend it. Another quirk of this game? 4 players. You see, this particular game was based upon the Super Jeopardy $250,000 tournament, which aired throughout the summer of 1990. A few of these games had 4 players competing for points rather than money, so the point values on the boards are altered to make the game more challenging. One final quirk I want to mention is that this game has "Dedicated to My Father" written on the opening credits. This is a prelude to an Easter egg that was shared by YouTuber Brett Jackard. He read an article on Moby Games, then shared a video on YouTube showing what happens when you put in David Wiebenson's father's name, Walt, into the name entry screen. Then you put a space, then select the letters writing Wiebenson.
O, and then N.
By the time the 90s were in full swing, GameTek had already made enough NES games based on game shows. Shows like Family Feud, Hollywood Squares, Classic Concentration, and Double Dare got made, while games like Press Your Luck and The Price is Right didn't get to NES. However, there was a Price is Right game for the PC, and there was one planned for the NES, but likely there were a lot of financial issues and programming shortcomings as to why it never made it. In other words, Bob Barker wanted too much money, Diane, Janice, and Holly wanted too much money to take their clothes off for the posters that would have been included in the box, and programming the pricing games would have been incredibly complex, and likely GameTek didn't have the crew to do it. So it was time for the company to move on to the SNES and make games for that console. And this is when GameTek started to suck, because the games that came out for the SNES and Sega Genesis were bad. Not terrible, but bad. The SNES version of Wheel of Fortune, according to YouTube channel Nintendo Complete, sounds like the most depressing version of the theme ever made. They're not wrong. The game itself moves so slow. Why does Vanna have to walk like she has a wedgie? That's something I always hated about these games. Yeah, having Vanna was nice and all, but why does she have to move so slowly? It slows the game down. With the NES games, you could finish a game in 10 to 15 minutes. Here it takes a good 30-40 minutes to finish a game. And for what? The same depressing version of the Wheel of Fortune theme and a screenshot of the outdated set. Yes, this set is from 1988, in a game from 1992. The updated deluxe edition doesn't improve much, just different puzzles and slightly improved graphics, and Vanna walks faster. But by then, if you wanted to play Wheel of Fortune, there were already a whole bunch of versions before that were far better, and if you had a Sega CD, you got a version made by Sony. The Jeopardy games have the same issues. They're not terrible, but they move way too slowly to be enjoyed. Plus, in the first game, the animated cutscene of Alex Trebek talking is just as creepy as Super Jeopardy's digitized speech.
The answer is...
The deluxe version of Jeopardy for SNES, it improves on a lot of aspects, like proper fonts for the dollar values and clue text, and it removes the creepy animation and replaces it with stills.
The answer is...
There was another version of Jeopardy called the Sports Edition, a really, really cheesy game of Jeopardy aimed at sports fans. This version unfortunately hasn't aged well at all, as a lot of clues are about sports and stats and players that all pertain to the time period that the game came out. As the SNES aged out and the Nintendo 64 debuted, GameTek itself had one last crack at making a Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy game for the console, and they failed. Hard. Now, Wheel of Fortune on N64, it has a decent pace to it, and it does a lot of panning and scanning to replicate a broadcast of the show from the late 90s, but that's the only redeeming qualities. Everything else just sucks. First of all, they did get the rights to Vanna White, but she looked like a lesbian at the time. Total turnoff for guys. And does Vanna turn or touch the letters? Nope. She just walks by them and they magically light up. Do you get to choose an envelope in the end of the game? Nope. Did this game feel like it was completed? Nope. It feels rushed. Now, at the time, in 1997, GameTek sold most of their properties to Take-Two Interactive, the company most famous for working with Rockstar Games to produce the GTA series. In 1998, what was left of GameTek filed for bankruptcy and released the worst Jeopardy game ever. Jeopardy on the N64 is literally the most beta mode thing I've ever played. Why doesn't the AVGN review this one? In Wheel of Fortune, the ultra-low resolution contestants at least clapped and cheered. In Jeopardy, they're cardboard cutouts. No emotions, no movements, no nothing. Alex Trebek is in the game. Cool, I guess. Oh, wow. Look at these dollar figures. They couldn't make them look like the real ones on the show? That would have taken at least one day of production. Same with the clues. They aren't in the proper Jeopardy fonts. This is why I say the game is the ultimate beta mode game. It feels like they made the bones, slapped on the cheapest skins they could get together, and put the game into a cartridge. But at the time, GameTek was ready to go. They knew if they didn't finish it, they never would have. So this game is what we got. Jeopardy on the N64. What a deal.
Thank you for playing Jeopardy. Let's do it again real soon.
Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy games on the PlayStation were produced by Sony, the same guys who made the versions on Sega CD. These versions are far superior. Jeopardy on the PlayStation allows you to punch in a name, it has all the proper fonts and clues, and Alex Trebek has more character in this one. He even references his appearance on Cheers in 1990 if one of the players has a runaway going into Final Jeopardy.
This is a no-brainer, unless someone pulls a Clavin.
Wheel of Fortune got 3 more versions by the Sony Studios, and all of them are essentially the same game engine but with updated puzzles and imagery. Like in the first Wheel of Fortune game for PlayStation, you at least get the hot lesbian Vanna. In the second edition, you get MILF Vanna. And in the third edition for PS2, you get GILF Vanna. But I wanted to talk about why I'm so appreciative of GameTek's efforts to bring these game shows to Nintendo and Sega consoles. You see, there was once a time where everybody watched game shows. Not just your care home grandparents or your old aunt and uncle. Everybody did. Some of my best memories growing up were watching game shows with my grandparents and aunts and uncles, so there's a lot of nostalgia I have. For a lot of us 80s and 90s kids, Vanna White was our first crush. Today, Vanna is nearing 70 and still hosting. I personally feel like she should just take her millions of savings and retire because whatever money she's making now, she does not need. Maggie Sajak, the daughter of Pat Sajak, is likely going to be the next hostess of the show, and when Pat left, Vanna should have went with him. As for Jeopardy, I haven't watched it on the daily since Alex died. Alex Trebek was one of the first major celebrities I could identify by name and face. He's one of the greatest class acts I've ever seen on TV. Even when I see the cutting room floor stuff like his phone Jeopardy outtakes and rehearsal for the 1983 pilot of Jeopardy that never took off, I take that as him being human.
So keep watching Jeopardy 24 hours a day and call this number. You dumb son of a bitch. You don't watch it 24 hours a day. Go again.
Okay, journalism for 100.
Brand new category. And the answer is their wings can flap up to 3,000.
Well, journalism.
You said journalism?
I said journalism. They pulled journalism.
Oh, what the hell am I doing? I thought I said birds. Jesus Christ. This duo based their play the front page on...
For a gaming company like GameTek to come along and put these game shows into Nintendo games, they brought a lot of parents, grandparents, and kids together to play. So when it's 1989 and you're at grandma's for after-church lunch, you can sit there and play Wheel of Fortune together on the Nintendo, and then play along together when the show airs during the week. So GameTek filled a quota, but when the time came, it was time for them to go. But they left behind a lot of great memories for 80s and 90s kids. And for that, I want to say, thank you, GameTek. Your games weren't perfect, but for kids who had grandparents who otherwise wouldn't pick up a controller, they allowed them a chance to get with it. Cheers.